In this video, I want to talk about how the Romans, the Greeks, and the Jews understood the coming of Christ or the coming of God, meaning that we're going to demonstrate how the people in those days would have understood the meaning of terms that are used for the coming of Christ in the scripture. In other words, we have the term parousia, which means presence or translated coming many times in the New Testament. And then we have the word appearing, which is sometimes translated from epiphaneia, which is the manifestation of a hidden divinity. And then we have the word power or dunamis. So we're going to look at all three of those words in this video to see how the Romans, the Greeks, and the Jews understood them in the historical context. And the source for this would be Josephus. In chapter 18, we have, that is book 18, excuse me, we have a story that relates how the Jews, as a result of some contention between Apion and the Jews who were in Alexandria, accused them before Caesar to basically say that they were disobeying the laws and would not erect a statue of Caesar in their temple. And so the decree went out that Petronius was supposed to go to the Jews and sort of force them to erect this statue. And so that was his responsibility. Now, when he went to them, they protested and said, we can't do this. We can't break the laws of our God. And while it was the time for them to till their ground, they refused to till their ground in protest. They threw themselves on their faces and for about 40 days exposed their necks and says, look, if you want us to do this, you're going to have to just kill us. And so they were very staunch in their protest against it. So they kind of put Petronius in a very, precarious situation. As my grandmother would say, he was caught between a rock and a hard place as to what he was going to do, because he asked them, well, look, are you ready to go to war against Rome? Seeing that Rome is, has all these preparations for war, and it would be like a no contest. So they said, no, we're not ready to go to war, but we are ready to die. And so you'll just have to kill us. And it was like 10,000 of them or more who were in this big standoff. It's kind of like the Cuban Missile Crisis in a historical way back in their day. And so these Jews refused to allow this statue to be erected, but they were willing to die in the event that if it were erected, they would have to do so over their dead bodies. And that's what they were basically telling them. So Petronius decided that he would go to Caesar and make the request, or at least he would send a letter to them and make this request. And in making the request, put himself and his men in danger, because of course he could have been killed or punished in some way by Caesar for disobeying Caesar's law. And so again, it was a very precarious situation for them. But he resolved on behalf of the Jews that he would do this because he realized how honest they were, how dedicated they were to serve him, and therefore he was willing to do this on their behalf. Now, when he goes before Caesar and writes this and tells them, look, they're ready to be destroyed, and you'll have to kill all 10,000 of them in war, etc., he decided that he would not do that. And so after they had made this appeal to him, Josephus records in, again, Antiquities, chapter 8, paragraph 6, that when Petronius had said this, he had dismissed the right assembly of the Jews. He desired the principal of them to take care of their husbandry and to speak kindly to the people and encourage them to have good hope of their affairs thus did he readily bring the multitude to be cheerful again. So they were distraught about this whole situation. Uh, they even presented to him that if they didn't till their fields, the people were going to go hungry, and then they were going to start a lot of, vandalism, et cetera, because of the poverty and uh, dire situation that would put people in, and it was going to make things worse in ruling the territory. And so he didn't want that kind of chaos to exist. So as it goes on, it says, and now did God show his presence to Petronius and signified to him that he would afford him assistance in his whole design. So he had to go before Caesar, but this was God's way of saying, I'm with you. At least that's what's related by Josephus, because Josephus records this. He says, and now did God show his presence to Petronius and signify to him, in other words, God showed by a sign to him that he would afford him his assistance in his whole design, in this whole point of going before Caesar to request, some type of leniency and permission for the Jews not to have to erect this statue. For he had no sooner finished the speech that he was making to the Jews, but God sent down great showers of rain, contrary to human expectation. Now, what does he mean by contrary to human expectation? What's contrary about rain coming down? Well, here's the point. For that day was a clear day and gave no sign by the appearance of the city, of the sky, of any rain, nay, the whole year had been subject to a great drought and made men despair of any water from above. So they were in an extremely dry spell, a dry season, a drought. It had not rained for just about an entire year. So no one had any expectation of rain. And so he says, even when at any time they saw the heavens overcast with clouds, insomuch that when such a great quantity of rain came, and that in an unusual manner, and without any other expectation of it. So this wasn't a normal situation. This was a time of drought. This was a time that they hadn't basically seen any rain for about a year. But in this was a sign that God was showing to Petronius to give him favor when he went before Caesar, so that if he did this on behalf of the Jews, he would be preserved and the Jews would not have to erect this statue or lose their lives. And so it says, the Jews hoped that Petronius would by no means fail in his petition for them. Now, but as to Petronius, he was mightily surprised when he perceived that God evidently took care of the Jews. He saw this sign of this rain coming in this year-long drought with no clouds in the sky, with nothing to indicate that it was going to rain that day after it had not for so long a time. And he perceived that this was a sign from God. And so it says, but as to Petronius, he was mightily surprised when he perceived that God evidently took care of the Jews and gave very plain signs of his appearance. Now, the word appearance there is the word epiphaneia, which means to manifest a hidden divinity. And it says, and this to such a degree that those that were in earnest much inclined to the contrary. In other words, people were out there trying to deny it. They were trying to find an argument. They were trying to find a condition, a circumstance, whatever it took to discredit this manifestation from God on behalf of the Jews in the presence of Petronius. Again, it says, and now did God show his presence. That's the word parousia, the same word that we have in Matthew 24:3, when the question is asked, when will these things be? What will be the sign of your presence, or parousia, translated coming? And again, in Matthew 24, 27, etc. And so from that point of view, this is the way they understood the term presence or the coming of God, because it says God did show his presence. Now, God is invisible, remember. No man has seen God at any time, yet he's manifesting himself to the people who were present. There were Romans, Greeks, and Jews who were present. So let's continue. It says, and again, those people out there, when he made this appearance, this manifestation of a hidden divinity through this rain that came down at a time totally unexpected, totally without condition, it says this was also among those other particulars in which he wrote to Caius. So he even told Caius about this, which all tended to dissuade him, and by all means to entreat him not to make so many 10,000 of these men go distracted, whom if he should slay, for without war they would by no means suffer the laws of their worship to be set aside. He would lose the revenue they paid him and would be publicly cursed by them for all future ages. So he's trying to make this argument, and he does in fact make this argument before Caius, letting him know, look, if you do this, you're going to have a war. 10,000 Jews are going to be slain. You're not going to get the tribute, the taxes that they would normally pay, and you'll be publicly cursed by the Jews for ages. Josephus goes on, moreover, that God, who was their governor, had shown his great power. The word power there is the word dunamis. Like we see in Matthew 24:30, then shall the sign appear in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the land mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power, or great power, and glory. And so there's the power, the dunamis, that's associated with the coming of the Lord. And that's exactly what this text is saying. We had a parousia, we had an epiphaneia, an appearance, and we had a demonstration of power. So moreover, that God, who was their governor, had shown his power most evidently on their account, and that such power of his has left no room for doubt about it. And this was the business that Petronius was now engaged in. That's recorded in Josephus' Antiquities 18, chapter 8, paragraph 6. So in summary, here is God showing his presence. He didn't jump out of the sky. He didn't poke his face through the clouds. He didn't appear in a physical body, but the scripture says he showed his presence to the extent that no one could doubt that that's what it was. And it satisfied the Romans, it satisfied the Greeks, and it satisfied the Jews. It even satisfied Caesar, who wasn't even there when they went to him. And so the point is, when we read these words presence in the scripture, a presence of God or a presence of Christ, we are not to understand that to mean that this is some physical, visible manifestation in terms of God himself, who is invisible, and Christ, who is the image of God, being invisible. And he showed his epiphaneia, which is the manifestation of a hidden divinity. For example, when we look in 1 Timothy chapter 6, when it says, who in his times he will show who is the blessed and only potentate, the King of kings and Lord of Lords, who dwells in unapproachable light, which no man has seen nor can see, who alone has immortality. Um, this is telling you that he was going to appear in that context. And the word, I think it's either verse 14 or 15, the word, who in that his times will show, that word is the word epiphaneia, a manifestation of his hidden divinity. That's what Christ was doing. Now, if it satisfied the Romans, the Jews, and the Greeks in the first century, as documented here, why would not that satisfy people today? You see, we're trying to put a meaning on Scripture and an application on Scripture that even the people of those historical times who understood God, and when you go back and read that entire account of chapter 18, you will see where even Petronius said, and the Jews said, this God that the Jews served was above Caesar, was above all others. So they understood that they were talking about this true and living God, this invisible God. And from that perspective, that's how they understood him to manifest himself, not to be walking around on earth or popping out of clouds on the sky in a literal sense, but to use these physical manifestations to demonstrate that that's who he was. And so he showed his power, Matthew 24:30. So when you read those passages in the New Testament about Christ's coming or presence or parousia, when you read them about his appearing or epiphaneia, and when you read about his coming with power, this is how it was being manifested. And that was clear to the Jews, to the Greeks, and to the Romans. So it's very, very important that we acknowledge that we understand that. And I would suggest that you go back and read the context. You can read it in the English, but also go a step further. Look it up in the Greek to find those particular words that are used, because they are all used in the context to talk about how God showed himself, showed his presence, how he made his appearance, and how he demonstrated his power in that scenario. There were Romans present, there were Greeks present, and there were Jews present, and they all acknowledged it. Even had a group of dissenters among them who tried their best to deny what had happened, and they were unsuccessful in doing that. So now, if you have this people in that day and time who saw these manifestations, recognized that this was a presence of God being manifested, why is it that people today, when God used the temple to demonstrate that that was his presence and power or dunamis and appearing of Christ, manifesting the hidden divinity, why would they deny that evidence that was so great and so widely and well known, not only in their day, but is yet being made known to people in our day and time, and has been so throughout all history? Well, that's what I wanted to share with you. I hope that it helps you to understand how we should be regarding and understanding these words found in Scripture: the presence, the appearing, the parousia, the epiphaneia, and the dunamis, the power of God manifested in his coming, and how he demonstrated that with the temple. The Scripture says in Luke 21:20-22, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those who are in the midst of her depart, and let not those who are in the country enter her, for these are the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. Take a moment to like the video, especially if you want me to make some more videos, and be sure and share it. Leave a comment. Let us know what you thought about it. And let us know if you went back and checked to make sure that this is what Josephus recorded, and you looked up those words to see that, in fact, that's how they use the words presence or parousia, epiphaneia or appearing, and dunamis in these natural events or physical events to manifest what they couldn't see with their eyes, but they acknowledged the evidence of the true and living invisible God coming through those events that were manifested. Thanks a lot. We'll see you in the next video.